will also remember to share my screen. There we go. So you should all be able to see the initial screen, Armenia, the forgotten country. Can you just wave if you can see that? Yeah, terrific. Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll make a start. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us again for this second series of lectures. I hope they will be as successful, as informative, and as interesting as the lectures that we had in the summer. You've probably seen the program. This time, we're actually not doing any lectures about Sicily. They are all about other destinations that Explorer Travel visit or used to visit. I think is in the case of Iran. I very much hope we will go there again, but I fear it won't be for a couple of years. So, for example, we're going to do a lecture on Georgia, some lectures on Greece, some different regions of Italy, Puglia, Calabria, and then also some on Turkey as well, Istanbul and Western Turkey. So I hope they'll be interesting, and I hope most of all that they'll be fun and informative. But we're going to start this evening with Armenia, and I've called my lecture The Forgotten Country, and there is a reason for that, which I think will become apparent as the lecture goes on. So I'll start off with a map just to show you where Armenia is and how it sits on the globe. It's a country with a population of just under 3 million people. It's a landlocked country. It has no sea shore, and it is bordered by 4 countries. To the west is Turkey, to the north is Georgia, to the east is Azerbaijan, and to the south is Iran. Now, with 2 of those countries, it has a good relationship, namely with Georgia and with Iran. But with 2 of those countries, with Turkey, it has a dubious relationship, and with Azerbaijan, it is pretty much at war. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the talk. So, as you can see, of the 4 borders, only 2 of them are actually open. And that's the one to the north with Georgia and the one to the south with Iran. The borders to the east and west, the land borders, are completely closed. And that means that not only is Armenia a landlocked country, it's actually quite inaccessible from the land. And it is not well served either by international flights. The only international flights that go there are from Paris with Air France. From Poland, I think there is a flight. Otherwise, it is from Moscow. So it's actually very, very difficult to actually get into the country. And that is one of Armenia's great problems, and that's one of the reasons why I called the lecture The Forgotten Country. In terms of area, it covers an area of about 12,000 square miles, which means it's an equivalent size to somewhere like Belgium, a little bit bigger than Wales, but smaller than the Netherlands. The capital city is Yerevan, here in more or less in the center. And the other 2 big cities are Gyumri and Vanadzor, up here in the northern part of Armenia. Vanadzor is quite a large industrial town. It also has this fabulous lake, Lake Sevan, which is one of the highest freshwater lakes in the world. It's an altitude of 1,900 meters above sea level. In fact, the whole of Armenia is generally quite high above sea level. There are some mountainous areas, particularly around Dilijan, forested areas. It's an area that looks very much like Switzerland, but the rest of the territory, as you'll see from many of the pictures, is actually quite barren, and it is steppe land. So it's pasture, grazing land for sheep and cattle and animals, essentially. I'm going to come back to this map later in my talk, but for the moment I'm going to move on. So the capital, as I said, is Yerevan. The population of Yerevan is around 1 million, which means that it is by far the largest city in Armenia, and about 1/3 of Armenia's population live there. It's quite a modern, cosmopolitan city, and as you can see from this photograph, many of the side streets, the sidewalks and so on, cafes there, you could almost imagine that you are in somewhere like Paris or anywhere else in Western Europe. It is also, interesting enough, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. The spiritual home of the Armenians is very much Mount Ararat. Now, this is another shot of Yerevan from hillside over the top of the city, looking down over the modern city. And you can see in the background, just poking out above the haze of the city, Mount Ararat. This photo was taken mid-morning in mid-June, when the heat of the summer was building up over the city, and it's quite difficult to discern Mount Ararat. In fact, you don't often get to see it. But the point about this is that Mount Ararat, of course, is not in Armenia. Mount Ararat these days is in Turkey. So Armenians, they look on their spiritual mountain with a great sense of yearning, if you like, because they can't go and visit it. And in fact, in the 1920s, when the architect Alexander Tamernian was commissioned to recreate the city of Yerevan, or rebuild the city of Yerevan, he did so with the idea that every house should be able to look out and have a view of Mount Ararat. Unfortunately now, these high-rise buildings have been built up, and they obscure the view of many of the buildings that he designed. But nevertheless, if you get up on, even on a summer's day, early in the morning, this photo was taken at 5 o'clock in the morning, there it is, Mount Ararat in Turkey, 5,000 meters above sea level, still snow covered in the middle of June. There it is. And the Armenians have that as a kind of, as I say, their spiritual home. Why? Well, of course, Mount Ararat is the place where Noah's Ark was supposed to have come to rest. The Armenian, for Armenian, Armenian as in person, is Hay. That's spelled H-A-Y, and the name for their country is Hayastan. Haik was one of the legendary forefathers of the Armenians. Now, we don't have time to go into this in this lecture, but it's very interesting actually to go into Armenian folklore and see just how many parallels there are with, for example, early Greek legends, and also Persian, in particular, Zoroastrian folklore. Very many parallels there that they share. And the Armenian people, the point about saying that is that the Armenian people have got a very, very long history. they can be identified as the Urartians of the Bible, who are mentioned in the Bible. And this photograph here is the Erebuni fortress in Yerevan, which was founded by the Urartian king Agishti in the 8th century BC. Now, the interesting thing about this is that if you ever travel around Eastern Turkey, you will find a lot of references to these Urartians, but you will have no explanation as to who these Urartians were. They were alongside the Assyrians, the Hittites. These were the ancient peoples of Asia Minor, and they were the Proto-Armenians. The language that they spoke was Armenian. And in fact, at the Erebuni fortress, we have an inscription written in the Urartian language, so essentially in Armenian, but it is written down using cuneiform, not the alphabet that Armenian is written in today. So that's a very interesting point, I think, to bear in mind when we consider the long history of the Armenian people. After that, Armenia was part of the Roman Empire under Pompey. It was later part of the Persian Empire under the Sasanians, and successively it became part of the Byzantine Empire. And then in the 9th and 10th centuries, the Armenian kingdom was ruled over by the Bagratid dynasty, which was to be one of the most powerful Armenian dynasties, and which laid the foundation for the great Armenian kingdom of Cilicia. Now, the kingdom of Cilicia stretched from the Mediterranean Sea down here. This is modern day Turkey. These are the cities of Adana and Mersin, all the way through what is modern day Eastern Turkey. This is Lake Van, right up to modern day Armenia here. And I think what this map shows us, this is a map of the Armenian cities in the ancient kingdom of Cilicia. You just see what a concentration of them there are in this corner of southern Turkey here, and in the area around Lake Van. Later, of course, it was assumed into the Ottoman Empire from the 14th and 15th century onwards, and there it remained until the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at the beginning of the 20th century. And we'll talk more about that in a short while. So as a result, many of the great Armenian cities are actually in Eastern Turkey, or modern Eastern Turkey. So this here is a photograph of a city called Ani, which is in the extreme east of Turkey. It's actually on the border of Armenia, modern day Armenia. And the city of Ani was the capital of the Bagratid kingdom in the 10th and 11th centuries AD. It was, at its height, one of the largest cities in the world at that time. It had a population of something like 100,000 people, and it was known as the city of 1,001 churches. It's a great shame to visit it today. There are probably just 3 or 4 churches still standing. But nevertheless, so how did it come to be such a rich city? Well, it stood on the Silk Road. This photograph where I'm standing here, and so I'm standing in Ani, beneath me is the river Aras, which is the border between the modern day Turkey and This is Armenia in the background here. And the Silk Road, back in the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries through medieval times, passed across this land here and crossed down over a bridge over this river and through Ani and then through the northern part of Turkey. So this was one of the explanations for the great richness of the city of Ani. But what I think is so striking about this photograph is just look at Armenia today. There's nothing there. I don't think there's a single building in that picture in Armenia. This is a church here. This is still in Turkey on this part of the headland here, but in Armenia there's nothing for as far as the eye can see. It's worth saying also that there's no way of crossing this river today. There is no bridge. There's no access between Turkey and Armenia at this point. If you wanted to go from here to here, for example, you would have to travel north through Turkey, into Georgia, through Georgia, and then back down into Armenia. So a couple of days journey just to get to the other side of the river. So Armenia, therefore, it remained as part of the Ottoman Empire up until the beginning of the 20th century. And then between 1918 and 1920, there was a fledgling Armenian state, which even engaged in several battles, successful battles against the Turks in absolutely this territory here. But then in 1922, it was assumed into the Soviet Union, and there it remained until the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1992, sorry. The language spoken in Armenia is Armenian. It is an Indo-European language. Very loosely, it's related to languages such as Greek, really only on the level of grammar, the way that the verbs are conjugated and so forth. It doesn't mean that Greeks and Armenians can understand each other. The alphabet is entirely unique to the Armenian language, and it comprises 39 letters, and it was invented in the beginning of the 5th century by an Armenian by the name of Mesrop Mashtots. You will notice that a few of the letters bear some kind of resemblance to Greek, but otherwise it is really an alphabet of its own. Very, very difficult to memorize, actually, I should say. And the only redeeming feature is that there are no lowercase and uppercase letters. It's all one case. One interesting thing about the alphabet, so the last 3 letters were added relatively recently, and until then it actually only comprised 36 letters. The first 9 of those letters doubled also as the digits 1 to 9. The second 9 letters doubled as the digits 100 to 900. The third set of 9 digits from 9,000 to 1,000, and so on. And in fact, in this sense, it was very similar to ancient Greek mathematics. But don't ask me how they performed mathematical calculations. I have absolutely no idea. Nowadays, of course, they use the Arabic numerals as does the rest of the world. The religion in Armenia is Christian, and the church is the Armenian Apostolic Church. And it's what is known as an autocephalous church, meaning it appoints its own head. In other words, it's not subject to an external patriarch, for example, in Rome or Constantinople or Jerusalem or anywhere else. But most importantly, Armenia was the first nation in the world to adopt Christianity, and it did so in 301 AD, so the very beginning of the 4th century, before any other nation did so. And according to tradition, the roots of the church go back even further than that, because it was in the 1st century AD when 2 of Jesus's apostles, Bartholomew and Judas Thaddeus, came to preach in Armenia between AD 40 and AD 60. Hence why it's known as an apostolic church. Bartholomew was martyred. He was flayed alive, and he's the saint depicted in Christian symbology as very often as a skeleton holding in one hand a knife and in the other hand his flayed skin. Now, incidentally, there is a very interesting connection here with the island of Lipari off the coast of Sicily, one of the Aeolian islands, because the people of Lipari believed that after his martyrdom, his body was transported in a coffin on a ship. The ship was shipwrecked, and the coffin was transported on the waves of the sea all the way to Lipari. The coffin was washed up on the shores of Lipari, and his skeleton, his body, now resides in Lipari. And in fact, the church in Lipari is dedicated to him, St. Bartholomew, and it's also why you get many people in the Aeolian Islands in Sicily who are called Bartolo or Bartolomeo and so forth. So that's an interesting connection. Judas Thaddeus, on the other hand, is the one who is sometimes identified as the brother of Jesus, and in the Roman Catholic Church at least is the patron saint of lost causes. However, the religious leader credited with converting the Armenians from paganism to Christianity was Gregory the Illuminator, who later became Saint Gregory. And poor old Gregory, for his faith, he was imprisoned by the King Tiridates III in a snake pit, which nowadays finds itself just underneath this hut here. And poor old Gregory spent 12 years in this pit of snakes, but he survived. And because he survived, it convinced King Tiridates to convert to Christianity and hence convert the rest of the Armenian nation. The snake pit is still there. You can still go and visit it. You can go down some steps, and it's a sort of rather dismal hole where Gregory spent 12 years. Subsequently, of course, this beautiful monastery was built here. And in fact, when we were here 5 years ago, 2016, our visit coincided with a visit by Pope Benedict to this monastery. And Pope Benedict, on his way out, he drove past us and waved to us and blessed us all. But just leaving the story of Christianity aside for a moment, this is an interesting photo, and this is why I put it in here, because these foothills here in the distance, these are the foothills of Mount Ararat. Ararat is off to the right. You can't quite see it. It's outside the picture. But this is Turkey, this area here. And in fact, if you look carefully, just here, I don't know if you can make out, there is the minaret of a mosque. This area here is no man's land, and this area here is part of Armenia, but the only people that can go there are Armenian farmers who have a special permit to go and farm this land. You probably can't make them out, but there are sentry posts along the border here. So when you come to visit Corvirap, the name of this monastery, you do get a sense that you really are on a border, you know, between, I can't really say east and west because it doesn't work like that, but it is a border with a certain amount of tension there. The modern day home of the Armenian church, however, is in a town called Ekmiadzin, and this is inside the cathedral of Ekmiadzin. Ekmiadzin is the, if you like, the Armenian equivalent of the Vatican or St. Peter's in Rome. So the Armenians hold this church particularly in great esteem. They come here and they light candles and say their prayers and so forth. And this photograph is rather interesting because this is in the treasury of Ekmiadzin. So it's a cross with some precious stones, but it's gold, of course, but the background of it is a piece of wood. Now this piece of wood is from Noah's Ark. It was found, it's a fragment of Noah's Ark. It was found on Mount Ararat and it was brought down to Ekmiadzin, where it is kept here in the treasury of the cathedral. There is a large Armenian diaspora throughout the world, most notably in the United States, but also in France, also in Turkey, Syria, Jerusalem, and in Iran. The Armenians in Iran were brought here, particularly to the city of Isfahan in the 17th century by Shah Abbas, because being Christians, they had good relationship, good connections with Europe. And they became the merchant trading class of Isfahan. They were the ones who contributed to the great richness of the city. So you have this building, which looks like an Iranian mosque, but if you look carefully, of course, it has the cross of the Christian church on it. The other place, interestingly enough, that has a large Armenian diaspora is Manchester. And the Armenians in Manchester arrived there as part of the textile trade back in the 19th century. I'd like to say this is our tour bus when we're in Armenia, but that's not quite true. It's just a nice bus that I took a photo of. So that's what this photo is doing here. However, the other thing that Armenia is particularly famous for is these beautiful stone carvings, or carvings of stone, or headstones as they are, tombstones. They're known as kachkars. And the incredible thing about them is that each one of them is absolutely unique. So no two stones, although they look similar, you'll find if you look carefully, they are not. You'll also think that they are symmetrical, but if you look carefully, you'll find that there's very slight differences, that they are not. And this is another of the intangible assets that is part of the UNESCO heritage. However, the event that most of us associate with Armenia is the Armenian genocide, which took place in 1915. And I think we have to talk about it because no talk on Armenia is complete without it. It's a very difficult subject to discuss, and it's certainly a subject that's very close to people's heart in Armenia today. So what I'll try and do is give a little bit of a balanced background on how this terrible tragedy came about. So up until the First World War, which coincided more or less with the the dying days of the Ottoman Empire, there had been in what is nowadays Turkey, what was then Asia Minor, a large Armenian population left over from the Kingdom of Kilikia, as I showed you earlier. Most of them were concentrated in the eastern parts of what is nowadays Turkey, but there was also a large Armenian merchant population in what is nowadays Istanbul, or what in those days was Constantinople. And I think it's important to say that throughout the history of the Ottoman Empire, the Armenians lived really quite comfortably and quite happily. And this was due to a system of governance which the Ottomans had, which was known as millet. That's spelt M-I-L-L-E-T. And this was a very unique system, actually, which allowed each ethnic population to govern themselves and to elect their own leaders. And it functioned very, very well. Except, unfortunately, in the case of the Armenians, it has to be said that there was a very large discrepancy between the rather wealthy Armenians of Constantinople and very often very poor Armenians in Eastern Anatolia. But then, and this is quite apart from the Armenians, throughout the 19th century, Christians under the Ottomans, and especially in the Balkans, notably, of course, Greece, were fueled by feelings of nationalism. And uprisings against the Ottomans became commonplace. And of course, they led to the foundation of the fledgling Greek state in 1821. Now, throughout all of this time, the Armenians were largely passive to the whole notion of nationalism. But with the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire, the First World War, also the system of millet began to fragment. The other contributory factor to all of this was that at the end of the 19th century, the victory of the Russians in the Russo-Turco War in 1878 meant that large swathes of Eastern Anatolia actually fell under Russian rule. They were no longer part of the Ottoman Empire. But the real disaster for the Armenian people was that in the discussions leading up to the Treaty of Berlin, the Armenian people were largely excluded. And that was on the grounds that they did not represent a nation. They didn't represent a country. They couldn't, in other words, they weren't invited to the table. I mentioned earlier that there was a large Armenian diaspora in Manchester. Well, in fact, they lobbied the politician Gladstone, and he was a very high-profile supporter of the Armenian cause during the Victorian times. But sad to say, Disraeli was unsympathetic to it. So it's possible that the British could have intervened at this time, but they didn't, unfortunately. At the same time, the Armenians began to harbour feelings of nationalism themselves, and there were some high-profile assassinations in Istanbul involving Armenians. And so these were the events that led up to 1915 and the beginning of what is now known as the Armenian Genocide, which was implemented mainly by what we nowadays call the Young Turks. Some young, ambitious Turkish generals who were anxious to rid Asia Minor of ethnic minorities, if you like. The genocide was implemented in two phases. The male population of Asia Minor, it was just a wholesale killing of them, whilst the women and children were driven to the desert in Syria and there they were just quite simply left to die. There was no help, there was no food, there was no water or anything. And it's estimated that in this way, about 1.5 million ethnic Armenians died between 1914 and 1923. As you're probably aware, Turkey has long denied the genocide. One of the problems, to be fair to Turkey, is that if it were to admit it, it would then be liable to compensation and reprisal of land to the Armenians, and it basically constitute much of the whole of Eastern Anatolia. But nevertheless, as I said, there are still many fabulous Armenian sites in the east of Turkey, even though these days they are, many of them, in a very sadly ruinous state. So that's, in as short a way as I can put it, the events that led up to this tragic event of 1950. But let's change the discussion a little bit now. Let's move on to something a bit lighter. Let's talk about Armenian food, because Armenians love their cuisine. Essentially, it's a medieval Mediterranean cuisine, very similar to Greek, Turkish, even Italian cuisine in some ways. So it's very rich in vegetables. So here, this is a market in Yerevan. You'll notice parsley, coriander, rocket, tarragon, some red basil, dill, I think that is, some onions here and radishes. So it's not a particularly spicy cuisine, but very rich in lots of herbs and different flavors. Also, lots of different types of cheeses, pulses, bread and rice play a very big part of Armenian cuisine. Here we are cooking up a meal of some rice. The cook is actually, he's making a model of Mount Ararat here. This is what this pile of rice here is, and he's decorating it with walnuts, apricots. Apricots are, Armenia is one of the biggest producers of apricots in the world. And bread is also very important. This is the lavash bread. It's an unleavened bread, but the rather wonderful thing about it is that you leave it to dry, and then when you want to eat it, you just sprinkle some water on it, heat it up, and it comes back to life, and it's just like fresh bread yet again. We should also mention Armenian wine, which is very, very palatable, delicious. And both Armenia and Georgia vie in the history books for being the birthplace of winemaking. I don't want to adjudicate who is actually the winner of that one, but here we are in a cave, the Areni cave in Armenia, where archaeologists have uncovered some amphora and evidence of winemaking that goes back to 6,000 years ago. So quite possibly this absolutely is the birth of wine making. We should also mention Armenian brandy. Armenian brandy is very well known, especially throughout the former Soviet Union, but also in places like France, and also in England too. In particular, it's worth mentioning that Winston Churchill was a great fan of Armenian brandy. He organized for Stalin to send him a monthly consignment of brandy. And the story goes that after a few months, he rather thought that the quality of this brandy was slipping somewhat. So he asked Stalin to investigate. And the supplier of this brandy admitted that he was actually sending inferior quality brandy. Stalin immediately had him condemned to a gulag, and Winston Churchill intervened. He asked for the brandy maker to be pardoned on the condition that he would continue to send only the best quality brandy to him. And I think also it's worth saying something about Armenian culture in general. Armenian weddings, of course, are very great events, very similar to elsewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey, Greece, and the Balkans, and so on. They're huge, huge parties, huge events, lots of dancing, lots of music that goes on. Carpet making is a very important industry in Armenia. Here we are in a carpet factory. You can see these different wools on the wall here, all dyed with organic compounds. So it's all completely natural dyes. These women here are actually restoring old carpets. That's what they are doing. Also, I haven't got a photograph of this, but it's worth mentioning the Armenian national sport is chess. And chess is taught as a compulsory subject in Armenian schools. I think also it's important to say something about Armenian music, which is a very large part of their culture. The Armenian national instrument is this one here. It's called duduk, and it's related to the oboe in the sense that it has a double reed. But the double reed is very wide, and it has a beautiful, mellifluous, very haunting sound. And I'd like to play you that a little bit now. So just a few moments of this video. There you go. I think you'll agree. It's a very beautiful, very unworldly, ethereal sound. That. Also, Armenian composers are very important. The most famous one, of course, is Aram Khachaturian. But we should also mention Komitas, who is rather the Armenian sort of Bela Bartok, if you like, of Armenian music, in the sense that it was he who collected many of the Armenian folk songs and wrote them down. Very sad story, though, unfortunately, Komitas. He was also a trained priest. He lived in Constantinople. He was arrested during the genocide, but he managed to escape. But nevertheless, he witnessed some of the atrocities, and although he got to Paris and lived safely in Paris, his last years were unfortunately in a psychiatric asylum, which is very sad to think. On a lighter note, of course, the French singer Charles Aznavour was of Armenian descent, as is indeed the Armenian singer Cher, just to round off the story of Armenian music. Just before I finish, I think it's apposite to say a few words about what is happening in Nagorno-Karabakh. Many of you have been asking for me to say something about the background to the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So if I can, just very quickly in a couple of minutes, sum up the background to this war. So going back to the map that we had at the beginning, I mentioned the 4 countries that border Armenia. But I rather skated over the details there, because down here to the southwest of Armenia is this territory here, known as Nakhchivan. Now, Nakhchivan is ethnically Azeri, and in fact, it's an autonomous republic of Nakhchivan, but it also belongs to Azerbaijan. So there we are. We've got Azerbaijan split between two different territories by this sort of peninsula of Armenia. And of course, if you want to go from this part of Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, the only way to do it is to go via Iran. There is also a very small land bridge here, border crossing between Turkey and Nakhchivan, and there are also flights between Nakhchivan and Istanbul. But that's only one part of the picture, because if you look up here, you will see there are little islands. These are islands of Azerbaijan inside Armenia. There is also another one down here. This belongs to Azerbaijan. But here is an island of Armenia inside Azerbaijan. So you can see it's complicated. But the other thing is, this is a Google map. One of the things you notice about Google is that the names of the cities are written in the language, in the script of the country that they denote. So we've got Georgian, Turkish, Farsi, and here the city names are written in Azeri, which is the same as Turkish to intents and purposes. Nagorno-Karabakh does not feature on this map at all. And the reason for that is that it is a disputed territory. It is not internationally recognized by anybody except Armenia. But the territory corresponds to this area here. And it's a mountainous area, but a very forested area. And the only way of getting to Nagorno-Karabakh is via a land bridge from Armenia here. You need a visa to be able to pass into it. And you arrive in this, the only place where visitors can stay is the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is Stepanakert, which is this town here. It is ethnically Armenian in the sense that all the people that live here are Christian. They speak the Armenian language, and yet, of course, they find themselves in a Muslim, Azeri or Turkish-speaking country. So how did this situation arise? Well, essentially, it goes back to the 1920s and the inception of the Soviet Union, the so-called Sovietization of the Caucasus, decisions made by the Caucasian Bureau under Joseph Stalin. And although the people of Nagorno-Karabakh lobbied him to be part of the Armenian Soviet, he deliberately placed them in the Soviet of Azerbaijan. And this is a process that is repeated throughout the Caucasus, the same in South Ossetia and also in Abkhazia. And it was a very deliberate ploy on the part of Stalin, was to divide people in such a way that they would never be able to reunite again. And he did it very successfully, because that is the cause of the terrible tensions and war that is happening today. So under the USSR, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh lived relatively peacefully until 1988, the breakup of the Soviet Union, when they demonstrated in Stepanakert to join Armenia. The demonstrations were put down by the Azeri military, and battles ensued. War broke out, and it continued up until 1994. There has been a very fragile peacefire since 1994, with just a few minor skirmishes along this border here. But unfortunately, in September of this year, war broke out again. As we speak, there is a fragile ceasefire being held. Let's just hope that it holds. So, as I say, Armenia very much is a forgotten country because it's very difficult to get to. It is completely closed off from the rest of the world by borders that you are not allowed to cross or to access. So I think really the incredible testament to the Armenian people, the fortitude, is the fact that they actually even still exist as a country. And I think the greatest testament to the Armenian character, their culture in a way, is their music. And I'd like to just finish off by playing you a very short video of a vocal quartet. This was recorded in a monastery in Gergard. It's completely pitch black, so there's not much to see. But nevertheless, it's a very moving and beautiful piece of music. So I thought this would be a nice way just to round off my talk. So just a minute and a half of listening to this. There we are. I think that's a tremendously moving piece of music. I hope you thought so too. And I hope a nice way to round off our talk. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves if you would like to. So if you'd like to ask a question, just turn on your microphone, wave and shout out. And has anybody got something to ask?
Yes.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
You featured lots of churches and buildings and things in Eastern Turkey that were Armenian. Is it easy to visit that area?
At the moment, it's not very easy. It's not impossible. It's possible. I mean, all the places are open. One of the problems that you find, unfortunately, is if you take a tour or something like that with a Turkish guide, they won't make any reference to the Armenians. They'll tell you that it's all Celtic or something like that. So that the history that you get is got nothing to do with the reality. Yeah. It is possible to visit them. The very sad thing, though, is that, and I've noticed it, is that 20 years ago, I first started visiting these places, and in the 20 years that since, they've been very left to crumble. I mean, they're not looked after in any way or shape at all. But it is possible to visit. They are there. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And I hope one day we might actually be able to take a trip there. That's one of them.
Please.
Anybody else with a question?
Yes, I've got one.
Yes. Who's that?
is the Armenian church more like one of the Orthodox churches, or is it much more in the Roman tradition?
I'm not a great expert in this, but to my knowledge, it's much more in the Roman tradition, actually.
Oh.
Yes, it is. It's unusual for that. It's, I mean, there are some things that it shares with the Orthodox, but there are many things that a Roman Catholic, for example, would recognize. I mean, there's no screen dividing the
no icon status,
exactly as you would get in an Orthodox church. So that doesn't exist at all. No. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's my pleasure. Yeah. Anybody else?
I've got another one.
Yes, go on. You're allowed to ask 2 questions. Yes.
Yeah, just like we have a lot of antagonism is probably the best way between Islams and Christians throughout Europe, with the terrorism that's going on, etc. Is there much of that in Armenia, since the fact they are Christians surrounded with a great deal of Islamists?
Not at all, really. I mean, it's very interesting, actually, that Armenia has started to take its own refugees, as it were. I mean, and yet they are welcomed and they're looked up. It's not something that you come across at all. Is any sort of tension at all in Armenia?
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Dan, have you got
I just wondered about the church you showed us has decorations that are very Islamic-like. That is, there weren't any human figure. If there's an iconoclastic streak in their religion there.
That's a very interesting question, actually, and I didn't really touch on that. Those decorations are in the ceiling of the church in Ekmirdzin, and you're quite right, they do recall very much Islamic patterns, but they're very unusual in Armenian churches. One of the things that I think strikes the visitor to Armenian churches is that they're actually quite bare inside. They don't have great numbers of icons and decorations and so on. And in fact, that's why I haven't got many photographs of them, because they're not terribly exciting to visit on the inside. But this I think is fascinating. The one thing that you do get on the inside of Armenian churches is a lot of inscriptions. And I mean, I can't read them. I don't understand them. I don't know them. But I'm told that most of those inscriptions are rather like diary entries. They're saying, you know, on the 4th of June, 1231, so-and-so donated this money to be able to do such and such and so forth. So it's a kind of a collective memory, a collective diary, if you like, to the community, rather than having the icons. I mean, this goes back to the question that we had earlier on. It's quite different from the Orthodox religions in this sense. But no, you don't get the Islamic decorations, really. It was only in Ekmirdzin. Having said that, of course, what are rather interesting are those kutch cards. I showed you the tombstones, and they are, I mean, they do recall a certain Islamic style to that, but also, as people have pointed out, there's also something quite Celtic about them as well. Yeah. So I think, you know, there's lots of crossover in the art and the design there. They
actually reminded me of Pictish stones that you get in northeast Scotland.
Absolutely, absolutely. People have said that before. Yes, yes. And I'm not enough of an authority on this, but people have said that there are connections between ancient Celts and, for example, and Armenians. I think that's a bit tenuous, but people have put that forward as an argument. Yes. So thank you, Ian. Thank you for reminding us. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yes, I do, Robert.
Yes. Oh, Robert. Hi. Nice to see you.
Hi. Yeah, good to be here. I wondered about modern Armenians' economy, and do they have much of an economy?
That's a very good question. No, I mean the Armenian economy is very depressed for obvious reasons. It's very, very difficult for them to export anything. But having said that, the Armenian diaspora is really quite wealthy, particularly the Armenians in the United States. And what has happened certainly in the last 20 years is that many of those have come back to Armenia and they have invested a lot of money in businesses there. So, I mean, you get some very nice hotels in Armenia, for example. Some of them have invested in carpet businesses and so forth. But the rest of the industry, I'm afraid to say, you know, I mean, I mentioned the city of Vanadzor. God knows what the industry is going on there, but they still have these vestiges of Soviet, again, I don't know, iron smelting factories, or I don't know what it is, but it really looks as if it's in the last century, and Armenia is struggling to come out of that. So they have a difficult time, really, and it's not going to be something they're going to resolve overnight. So thank you for bringing up the question. Yes.
So Damien.
Yes. Oh, Kate, nice to see you. Yes.
So their exports presumably have to all go out by air, do they, or do they have a road haulage?
Well, some of them can go out through Georgia. Yes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they obviously can't go out through Iran, because if they get into Iran, they're not going to go anywhere from Iran. But they do go out through Georgia, and this is why fortunately, they maintain a very good relationship with Georgia. And that road between Georgia and Armenia is quite a busy road. It's not a very good road. It's not a motorway, a dual carriageway, but nevertheless, it's very important. It's the lifeline to the Armenian economy. Yes.
Damien?
Yes. Oh, hello. Yes.
Margaret, yes. Is there much tourism too?
Well, yes.
Armenia?
Good question. It's beginning. Yes. The big problem, of course, is actually getting there. Very few direct flights. I mean, there are a few charter flights in the summer, but that's one of the big problems is actually getting to Armenia. When we go to Armenia, we go via Georgia. In fact, that's why our trip combines Georgia and Armenia. But there is tourism. It's fledgling tourism, I think it's true to say. But there is skiing, for example, in the wintertime. There's hiking. There is the beginnings of wine tourism. People are going to Armenia to taste wine. And I think the other thing is, in the summertime, they get a lot of second and third generation Armenians coming from the United States, Canada, and other parts of the world, who come to, as it were, learn Armenian, to learn Armenian culture. So that's the kind of thing. But you don't get, I mean, there's no beaches or anything like that. There's nothing. I'm afraid to say. Yeah.
There might be beaches on the lake.
Well, there are. Yes, there are, Kate. There are. But I mean, they're not. I mean, having been to the beach in Sicily, I mean, I'm afraid they don't quite compare to them.
No, I understand.
Yes.
But I actually looked at trying to get to Armenia from Scotland, a couple of years back, because I really wanted to go. And I was warned I probably wouldn't manage it, and I know I won't have got arthritic knee now, so I really wouldn't. But it was almost impossible. It's short of coming down to Gatwick and going, as you say, to Georgia, and then where Gatwick or Heathrow or something, and then to Georgia and up. It's going to take me 2 days.
It would take 2 days. Yes. Yes. Oh well.
What currency do they use in Armenia? Have they got their own currency?
Yes, they do. They have the Armenian dram. I wonder if I might even have some hiding away in my cupboard here. Maybe I can show you show you what it looks like. Here we are, look. So, so here is 10,000 Armenian drams. There you go. I'm afraid I can't tell you who the chap is on the banknote, but yes, they do have their own currency, and it's entirely worthless outside of Armenia.
Oh, Rishi Sunak.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I think we've got time for one last question, if there is one. Otherwise, it's time for us to go and have our supper, those of us in England.
Yeah.
Anyone last question?
I've got a very quick one. If
Go on.
nobody,
Yes, go on,
your
go on.
slide number 31, you did a bit of carving, and you were busy talking about all sorts of other things, but I just thought the carving was just fantastic, and I just wondered any connection. But if it's going to take too long, forget it. Only my
Slide
it's my
31. Yes, these are, yes. Yes, I can talk about that actually very quickly. If I share my screen again, I didn't talk about it, and it's actually quite interesting. This is a tombstone. This is a tombstone, but it is the carving here depicts the celebration of a wedding. This is the bride and groom here, and these are the guests sitting around the feast table, and these are, I mean, they look like pizzas, don't they? But I'm sure they're not. But that's
they do better than us in lockdown. Yeah.
Yes. Well, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So, and this is a carving in. I didn't tell you about this either, but in a cemetery by the name of Noroduz. Unfortunately, this isn't a very good photo because you can't see the front of each of these tombstones, but the front of each of these tombstones has got a beautiful carving as well. So it's known as Noroduz, and it's a beautiful cemetery in the center of Armenia, really. Yeah, but that's what it is. Yeah. Well, I think on that note, we will leave it there. Thank you to all of you for joining us. And I very much hope you have a good week, a safe week.
Yeah.
And we'll look forward to seeing you all next week. And we will be talking about Greece and the classical and pre-classical sites of mainland Greece then.
Can't wait.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So have a good week and see you next week.
You too.
Okay, then.
very much.
Bye-bye then.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
very much,
Bye-bye.
Damien. Thank you,
Thank you.
Damien.
My pleasure. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.